Have you ever wondered what makes a particular subclass in Destiny great? I know I have. Over the course of my time playing Destiny 2, I've played with each subclass and I've gravitated to a few, but I can never put my finger on why I did besides thinking to myself, well, this is fun, or, well, this is strong. As a hunter main, I find myself hopping between all the different subclasses each season to see how they feel with new exotics, weapons, buffs, and of course artifact mods. But I always find that I land right back on either Void or Arc, and even with those two, I find myself spending the most time in endgame content using various different Void builds. So I want to get to the bottom of why I keep coming back to Void Hunter, why it's so compelling to play, and why it might just be the gold standard for subclass design as a whole. Hey everyone, I'm Rzeki, and welcome to my design analysis of the Void Hunter in Destiny 2. If you're not a Void Hunter, don't worry. I'm sure you'll be able to follow along with me, no problem, and in the future I'll be making more videos about your favorite subclasses too. Before we get into it, I do want to mention that I'm sick this week, which is why I sound a little funny, so just bear with me on that. And also, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for the insane support on my previous video about exotic armor. You guys really blew it out of the park, and I wasn't really expecting it, and it means a ton to me. So thank you for that. If you missed it, I definitely recommend giving it a watch after this one. Link is in the description and in the card on screen now. It got a lot of positive reception, so I'm sure you'll find it interesting. As always, if you like what I have to say in this video, make sure to let me know by leaving a like, a comment with your thoughts. I read every single comment on the last video, and subscribe to get more Destiny 2 design videos delivered straight into your sub box. With all that out of the way, thanks again for all the support, and let's get right to talking about Void Hunters. Upon my return to Destiny 2 and the Witch Queen after a pretty long hiatus, I was itching to find a fun build to play. I went straight to YouTube, searched up best hunter builds in Destiny 2, and found a ton of Void builds. Maybe this is just because Void 3.0 had come out at the time. Either way, I picked a random video from this random guy, maybe you've heard of him, Mac Dix. By the way, Mac, if you're watching this, I love you, and I still watch your videos every week. And his video was about the Omnioculus Hunter. I grinded out the exotic, threw together his build, and instantly fell in love. The Void Hunter gameplay loop is easy to understand, and it's really addicting. Go invis, assassinate an enemy, go invis again, protect allies. It was awesome, but what made it so good in the first place? Just like last video, let's get an overview of what I think subclass design needs in order to be fun. Number 1, it needs a solid base gameplay loop. Number 2, the gameplay loop must be flexible. And 3, the subclass must not have too many or too few build paths. These 3 points are relatively simple and are, of course, up to a bit of interpretation. We could start by going over our first bullet point, our core gameplay loop. If you hear Void Hunter, the one thing you probably think of is invisibility. Our power fantasy as a Void Hunter is to come in and out of the shadows, sneaking our way behind enemy lines to take out threats or help allies from the safety of our own invisibility. The basic gameplay loop is as follows. Gain invis through some means, move to an objective location, whether that's a teammate's res, an enemy to finish, cover from fire, and then exit invis to complete the objective, regain invisibility, and repeat. It's pretty simple, and you could pretty much just boil it down to go invis, do something, go invis again. The cool thing about the Void Hunter kit in their class-specific options like class abilities and aspects is that they all feed directly into this invisibility gameplay loop. Our easiest example here is one of our aspects, Vanishing Step. Vanishing Step simply grants invisibility upon using our class ability. So now we could jump straight into our gameplay loop by dodging to give us invisibility. You'll find that pretty much every Void Hunter takes this aspect by default, but you don't have to. Our other aspects also give us other entry points into the same gameplay loop. Trapper's Ambush gives us a special ability. For me, it's bound to the X key. For Warlocks, it's the same button Icarus Dash is bound to. I'm not sure about Titans. It's called Quickfall, and when used in the air, it will cause you to dive into the floor, granting invisibility to yourself and nearby allies upon landing. Note that Quickfall also will use up your melee charge. And our final aspect, Stylish Executioner, grants us invisibility after defeating a Void debuff target. These aren't all the effects that these last 2 aspects provide, but you can see how each one helps us start and or continue our gameplay loop by allowing us to go invisible easily. There's also other synergies here, like refunding your melee with Gambler's Dodge, which could help you keep a high uptime on your quick fall from Trapper's Ambush. Of course, we also have fragments that assist us here, but I won't spend too much time on them since all classes have access to the same fragments. The best out-of-the-box fragments are Echo of Persistence to increase our invisibility duration, and Echo of Obscurity, which gives us invisibility when using our finisher on an enemy. Other fragments also will benefit you, but it's more dependent on how you set up your own personal build. Now let's move into our second concept, having a flexible gameplay loop. We want to have a solid core for our gameplay, but we don't want to make it too rigid since that limits both the players in terms of build crafting and the designer's ability to design new mechanics and interactions for the subclass. Starting with our designer friends over at Bungie, we can see how they need to have the freedom to create fun experiences using the base gameplay loop by either A, complementing it, or B, disrupting it. Usually the designers will do this through the vector of exotic armor or exotic weapons, but sometimes they might add new aspects of fragments into the subclass itself, like we've seen throughout this year for strand aspects, as well as new light fragments at the beginning of the expansion. What's kind of interesting is that when we shift our focus over to the players are also kind of like mini game developers when they're crafting a build. Players also want to stretch, pull, and change the core gameplay loop to create their own unique experience. At the center of all this is, of course, our exotic armor. So let's take a look at two of the most popular Void Hunter exotics and how they change our gameplay loop. You'll notice in both of these examples, we maintain the base loop of go invis, do objective, go invis, even though they serve completely different purposes. First up, we have everyone's favorite, Omnioculus. Here's a quick rundown on its effect. We gain a second charge of our melee, Snare Bomb, gain extra damage resistance while invisible, and when we apply invisibility to allies, we recover 50% melee energy per ally hit. The way Omnioculus augments our core gameplay loop is by extending the duration of each individual cycle in our loop. When using Omnioculus, your goal is to maintain your invisibility as much as possible. You have Vanishing Step or Trapper's Ambush to enter invisibility, and you have tools like Gambler's Dodge to return a charge of your Quick Fall, and of course you have Quick Fall to apply invis to teammates, which also refunds your Quick Fall charge. Everything you do here revolves around applying invisibility to yourself and allies as much as possible. You could say invis for long periods of time, only leaving to assassinate targets or to res allies. On screen, I have a quick visual for anyone a bit confused. On the left is our base loop, with invisibility taking up, I'd say, about 50% of our time. On the right, we have our Omnioculus loop, which you could see invis takes up way more of the time in the loop compared to our base. These numbers are approximate, but I think is a good visual anyway. But what if we want to go in the opposite direction and speed up our loop instead? This comes in the form of our newer exotic, Gyrfalcon's Hauberk. Hopefully I said this right. I know there's a lot of controversy on that. This exotic has a lot going on, but bear with me. After emerging from invisibility, your void weapons gain volatile rounds. When you use a finisher on an enemy while you're invisible, you gain a reserve overshield that you could activate when using your next class ability. I glossed over a couple details, but these are the main components. On the surface, this exotic only provides a short period of volatile rounds before you need to regain your invisibility to proc it again. But with the support of our hunter aspects, we turn this into a literal rapid-fire invisibility machine. If we take Vanishing Step and Stylish Executioner, now we can go invis by dodging to start our gameplay loop, then we shoot to gain volatile rounds from Gyrfalcons, which is a void debuff, so defeating any affected target will proc Stylish Executioner, granting us invis, which then gives us more volatile rounds, etc., rinse and repeat. Instead of using our invisibility loop to stay out of the eyes of our enemies, we are instead dipping our toes in every couple seconds to gain an offensive advantage. And yes, if we want to stay invis, we could stop shooting at any point. Here's my silly little visual again, but this time with Gyrfalcons added in. You can see the loop is pretty much just a quickly repeating version of the other two. It's the same steps, but with a little bit of a different expression. There are also a few options that operate in other unique ways with our loop, and depending on other exotics you may pick, you'll have a different way of shaping the core gameplay loop to your liking. Maybe you're a fan of overshields and can make use of Mothkeeper's wraps. Maybe you want to spam supers with Orpheus Rig. These are pretty different from Omnioculus and Gyrfalcons, while sharing the same core gameplay loop with a little twist. As a player, you have the freedom to reshape the gameplay loop for yourself, and designers have the freedom to give new tools to players to expand how they interact with that same gameplay loop. And this brings us to our last point. You might have noticed that even though we are limited in our ability to break out of the core gameplay loop, we have yet to feel pigeonholed into one build path, and there's not so many options that it's become overwhelming to understand either. If we have too few options, we'll be stuck with picking a single viable build, which honestly feels a lot like the spot Stasis is in right now, but that's another video. And that makes it really, really boring to play because we have no viable choices. As players, we wear out the newness of a single option quickly, and so it becomes boring, and it's entirely at the mercy of buffs and nerfs. So one nerf could make it become irrelevant in an instant. There's no other option to use if one gets nerfed because it's, well, the only one. On the other hand, too many choices can also be a problem. For one, it means we probably don't have a strong base gameplay loop to build off of since it has to support so many different branching options. This also means that it's hard to keep synergies tight. In Void, our fragments have strong connections through keywords such as volatile and devour. Void has a number of different fragments that could all be used together, and although there might be a meta selection, you could choose other options and still find pretty good synergies. Let's take a quick look at Strand. So, first of all, do I think Strand is poorly designed? No, definitely not. But I think it could give us a pretty good glimpse into the world of too many options. We have, I think, 3 main Strand archetypes. We have Grapple, Threadlings, and Suspend. There's others, but I think these are the big 3. We have a bunch of fragments that interact with each of these archetypes, but they don't really interact with each other. Threadling fragments barely work with Suspend fragments. Suspend fragments don't really help us with Grapple. And then there's just some random ones that don't really fit into any archetype at all, which is fine. Void has some of these as well. And I find that with Strand, there has been a bit of a history of Bungie needing to greatly improve things like Threadlings, and then they do, but they then turn around and also add in new archetypes like Banner of War Titan. There's a lot going on here, and it honestly becomes difficult to choose a build path that's right for you. And finally, when you do, you really only have 3 or so fragments that are actually worth choosing. So the build is not unique to other ones within its own archetype. Because Void sticks to simplicity, it helps to encourage build crafting and also allows most builds to be at least functional, if not fun or strong, with a unique flavor depending on the player. The limitation of choices, without going too far of course, provides designers with the tools to easily make changes to the existing options, which not only helps with coming up with new ideas for exotics and mechanics, but it also makes tedious back-end designer things like balance way easier. Too many choices means there's too much to keep track of, too many interactions, too many builds, too many weapons. It's a nightmare to balance everything efficiently, let alone correctly. The restricted pool of options in the Void Hunter kit makes balancing it a lot easier. Invisibility is too strong in PvP. Alright, we could reduce the duration, add a cooldown time, etc. And they don't have to worry about it impacting other Void things like Devour. But hey, maybe Devour is giving you too much health per kill in PvE. It's overbearing. Okay, we could isolate Devour and change it without affecting the core gameplay loop of our subclass anyway. All of this is why Void Hunter should be the gold standard for subclass design. Not that it should be the cookie cutter answer. We don't want every subclass to be exactly the same after all, but we want it to be a good guide for how to construct the gameplay for future subclasses. We want each subclass to have a core power fantasy. In Void Hunter's case, we go with the Invisible Assassin. We take that concept and form a core gameplay loop. Go invis, do a thing, go invis again. We use this core gameplay loop as a solid base for building up our aspects, class abilities, and fragments to make this gameplay loop fluid and intuitive. Then we decide how we want to let players stretch and pull this gameplay loop into a shape that best fits them through the design of exotic armor and weapons that have unique interactions with our core gameplay loop. And finally, we have a reasonable set of limitations that keep players excited to build craft, while also not overwhelming them with too many choices. So Bungie, if you're listening, and still have some wiggle room on that possible 6th subclass, if it's actually going to exist, maybe take a page out of the old Void 3.0 rework. I promise you'll make something great out of it. But hey, that's just one guy's opinion. Maybe you agree with me. If you do or don't, leave me a comment with your thoughts. I had a ton of fun talking to a bunch of people in my comments of the last video, so let's see if we can do that again. And of course, if you like the video, definitely drop a like and also subscribe if you haven't already for more of this in the future. If you want even more, you can catch me live over on twitch.tv/Rozeki most weeknights around 9 or 10 p.m. Eastern. And as I said earlier, if you're looking to hear me talk about your favorite class, I'll be making more videos analyzing subclass design in the future, so definitely let me know which ones you want to see down below. But, as always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.